March 23, 1945, Rheims, France, the forward headquarters of the Allied Command. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower sits in his office, carefully reviewing casualty reports from the Rhine River crossing operations. His Chief of Staff, General Walter Bedell Smith, stands beside him, indicating unit positions and movement markers on a massive situation map mounted across the wall. Soft afternoon light filters through the windows. The atmosphere is orderly, precise, professional. Everything moves with military efficiency. The door suddenly opens. No knock. It simply swings wide. George Patton strides in. His uniform is filthy. Dried mud cakes his boots, climbs up his trousers, and streaks across his jacket. Dark splatters stain his chest and sleeves. A smear of dirt runs across his cheek. His helmet is tucked under one arm, equally coated in grime, and he is grinning like a schoolboy who just won a fistfight. Eisenhower looks up from his papers and freezes. He simply stares. Bedell Smith stops speaking in the middle of a sentence. "George," Eisenhower says slowly, measuring every word, "why are you covered in mud?" Patton's grin only widens. "Because I just crossed the Rhine in a tank. Ike, I led the assault myself. Somebody had to show those kids how it's done." Eisenhower places his pen down, very carefully, very slowly. "You're 60 years old. You're an army commander. And you were in a tank under fire. Damn right I was." If you want to understand how one 60-year-old general's refusal to command from safety sparked one of the most intense arguments between two legendary leaders, hit that subscribe button right now and join the World War II elite community. We bring you the untold stories that reveal the real personalities behind the history books. Now, let's see exactly what happened when Patton decided that age and rank meant nothing if his soldiers needed to see him lead. Bedell Smith quietly closes a folder in his hands. His expression says everything. This is going to be a long conversation. Eisenhower rises from behind his desk and walks around until he stands directly in front of Patton. "Beadle, get me the 3rd Army situation reports from this morning," he says. "All of them." Smith nods and leaves the room. The door closes behind him. Now Eisenhower and Patton face each other. Two old friends. Two completely different philosophies of command. "George, sit down." "I'm fine standing." "Ike, that wasn't a suggestion. Sit." Patton sits, still grinning faintly, still covered in mud. Eisenhower remains standing, looking down at him. "Talk," Eisenhower says. "What the hell were you thinking?" According to the official 3rd Army after-action reports archived at the National Archives, the Rhine crossing at Oppenheim began on the night of March 22, 1945. The 3rd Army's 12 Corps carried out a surprise assault crossing with minimal artillery preparation. German forces were completely caught off guard. Resistance was lighter than expected. By dawn on March 23rd, a solid bridgehead had been established on the eastern bank of the river. But something unusual appears in the morning reports. General Patton's command post is listed as mobile with no specific coordinates. His radio traffic went completely silent for approximately 6 hours, between 0500 and 1100 hours. 3rd Army Chief of Staff, Major General Hobart Gay, reported Patton as temporarily out of communication to Supreme Headquarters. The reality was simpler and far more shocking. Patton had climbed into an M4 Sherman tank with a company from the 4th Armored Division and crossed the Rhine with them, not in a command half-track, safely behind the assault, not observing from the western bank. He was inside a tank in the assault wave itself, under German artillery fire. He was less than 200 yards from German defensive positions, directing tank movement at the age of 60, while commanding an entire army of over 250,000 men. Bedell Smith returns with the reports and spreads them across Eisenhower's desk. The timeline is unmistakable. Patton's last confirmed position was at the 12th Corps command post at 2,200 hours on March 22nd. His next confirmed position was back at 3rd Army Headquarters at 1,200 hours on March 23rd, 6 hours unaccounted for. Eisenhower studies the documents. His jaw tightens. "George, explain to me why you were in a tank. You are an Army commander. You command from headquarters with maps and radios and staff officers who know where you are at all times." Patton leans forward. The grin finally fades, replaced by pure intensity. The boys needed to see their commanding general wasn't afraid to cross with them. "Ike, this was the first time we crossed a major river directly into Germany. The Rhine isn't just any river. It's the barrier to the German heartland. Somebody had to show them it could be done, that we weren't afraid, that their leadership stood with them." "That is not your job," Eisenhower says flatly. "Winning is my job," Patton replies, "and soldiers win when they're inspired. You inspire them from headquarters with strategy and coordination. I inspire them by being there, by showing them. I go where I send them. That's how I've always done it. That's how 3rd Army operates." Bedell Smith speaks carefully. "Sir, your staff reported you out of communication for 6 hours. Staff regulations require Army commanders to maintain constant contact. What if something had gone wrong during the crossing? What if coordination with your flanking units had been necessary? Nobody knew where you were." Patton turns to him sharply. "Beadle, to hell with staff regulations." "Regulations?" Patton snapped. "We took the bridgehead and expanded it to 3 miles deep by noon. No casualties in the lead company I was with. 0. Because I was there to direct the movement personally, to point out targets, to keep the momentum going. That's what leaders do." And Eisenhower walked a window and looked out over French countryside, and when he spoke his voice was controlled but firm. "That's not what Army commanders do, George. That's what company commanders do. Maybe battalion commanders, but not 3-star generals responsible for an entire front." And Patton replied, "Then maybe I'm not a typical 3-star general." And Eisenhower turned back to him and said, "No, you're not. And that's been the problem for 3 years now." And the room went quiet. Patton's grin vanished completely, and he stood slowly. "If you've got something to say to me, Ike, say it." And then Eisenhower said something that made Patton realize this was not just another reprimand, that this was personal, deeper than tactics or regulations. Because according to Bedell Smith's later memoirs, Eisenhower spoke quietly but with unmistakable emotion. "George, you're 60 years old. You had heart trouble. Your doctor told me personally you're supposed to avoid extreme physical strain, and you climbed into a tank under artillery fire. What the hell were you thinking? What if you had been killed? What happens to 3rd Army then? What happens to the entire Southern advance?" And Patton met his eyes and said, "Then General Eddy would take command of 3rd Army and finish the job. He's a good officer. 12 Corps would step up. The mission would continue. But I wasn't killed, Ike. We succeeded. And now every soldier in 3rd Army knows their commanding general will go where he sends them. That matters. That's worth the risk." And Eisenhower answered, "Don't get to make that calculation anymore, George. You're too important, too visible. If something happens to you, it's not just a tactical problem. It's a strategic one. It's a morale problem across the entire theater. The press loves you. The soldiers love you. And if you get killed doing something reckless." And Patton interrupted, "Since when do we fight wars based on public relations? Since when does a general's safety matter more than the mission?" And Eisenhower raised his voice to match Patton's. "Since that general became a symbol, since his face is in every newspaper, since soldiers from California to Maine know his name, you're not just another field commander anymore. George, you're Patton, and Patton getting killed in a tank assault at age 60 would be a disaster for this Army and this war effort." And the words hung in the air while Bedell Smith looked deeply uncomfortable, because this was no longer professional debate, but 2 men who had known each other for decades and commanded through years of brutal war arguing about something fundamental. And Eisenhower's voice softened as he stepped closer and said, "George, I need you alive. I need you commanding. We're maybe 40 miles from Berlin. The Germans are collapsing. This war could be over in weeks. Don't throw away because you need to prove you're still tough. Everyone knows you're tough. You prove that in North Africa, in Sicily, in France, you don't need to prove it anymore." And Patton stood there, still covered in mud, looking at his old friend. And when he spoke, his voice was quieter but absolutely firm, with respect. "Ike, yes, I do, every single day. Because the minute I stop leading from the front, I stop being Patton. I become just another headquarters general pushing pins on a map. And you need Patton right now. You need the general who makes Third Army move faster, fight harder, and win more consistently than any other army in this theater. And that general doesn't exist without mud on his boots." And he turned toward the door, stopped, looked back, and said, "I'll be at my headquarters if you need me. We're planning the drive toward Frankfurt. Should be there in 72 hours. And he walked out still trailing mud, and the door closed behind him, and Bedell, Smith, and Eisenhower stood in silence for a long moment until Smith finally asked, "Do you want to issue a formal reprimand, sir?" And Eisenhower slowly shook his head and said, "What good would it do? George Patton doesn't follow regulations when they conflict with how he believes wars should be fought. He never has and he never will." And Smith asked, "Then what do we do?" And Eisenhower replied, "We let him be Patton, and we hope he survives long enough to see Germany surrender." And then Eisenhower walked his file cabinet and pulled out a folder marked Patton, George S, Command Issues, and it was thick, very thick, and he opened it and began reading incident reports dating back to 1943. Sicily, August 1943. Patton personally led a reconnaissance patrol into enemy-held territory near Palermo, took small arms fire, returned to his command post 4 hours later, covered in dust and grinning with tactical intelligence he had gathered himself. His staff had been frantic, and the incident was overshadowed a week later by the notorious slapping incident, and everyone had forgotten about it. Patrol, but Eisenhower did not forget, and he made a note in Patton's file that read, "Exhibits persistent disregard for personal safety, unable or unwilling to command from appropriate distance, requires constant supervision." And then came Normandy in July 1944, when after Third Army became operational, Patton developed a habit of visiting frontline units, not behind lines, not at division headquarters, but at the actual front, at company command posts, battalion aid stations, anywhere. Soldiers were in direct contact with the enemy. His security detail protested, his staff objected constantly, and Patton ignored them all. And one report from a deeply worried aide described Patton standing fully exposed on a tank turret, using binoculars to observe German positions less than 500 yards away while mortar rounds landed nearby. And when the aide tried to get and take cover, Patton's response was recorded in the aide's diary. "How am I supposed to know what my soldiers are dealing with if I don't see it myself?" And now there was a Rhine crossing at 60 years old, in a tank under fire, and Bedell Smith watched Eisenhower review the file and said quietly, "He's not unchanged, sir. This is who he is." And Eisenhower replied, "I know. That's both the problem and the solution." And the next day, March 24th, Omar Bradley commanded the 12th Army Group and was Patton's direct superior in the chain of command. And he had heard about the Rhine incident and he was furious. "Ike, we need to talk about George." And Eisenhower leaned back in his chair and said, "I figured you'd call." And Bradley replied, "He was in a tank at 60 years old under fire. This is insane. You need to put a stop to this before he gets himself killed." And Eisenhower asked, "How exactly do I do that, Brad?" "Issue an order." And Bradley snapped, "Yes, issue an order. General Patton is hereby forbidden from being near combat." And Eisenhower answered, "He'll ignore it." And Bradley's voice tightened with frustration. "Then you relieve him, or you accept that one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, you're going to get a telegram saying George Patton was killed in action doing something brave and stupid, and Third Army will collapse because Patton is Third Army. Without him, it's just another field army. With him, it's the most effective striking force in Europe. You can't let him throw that away on some personal need to prove his manhood at 60. And Eisenhower was quiet for a moment before saying, "You're right about everything except one thing. If I relieve George, Third Army collapses immediately. His soldiers fight for him personally. His division commanders operate on his philosophy. His entire army is built around his personality. If I take him away, even for his own safety. I destroy the weapon I need most. And Bradley asked, then what do you suggest? And Eisenhower replied, I suggest we let George beat George, and we pray he survives. And Bradley said, that's not a strategy. That's hoping for luck. And Eisenhower answered, it's the only option I have. You want to try ordering George Patton to stay safe, be my guest. And the call ended, and Eisenhower sat alone in his office staring at Patton's file. Knowing the man was impossible, insubordinate, reckless, and absolutely irreplaceable, but Patton was not done, because 2 days later, on March 26, Eisenhower received another report stating that Patton had been touring forward positions. Again, riding in a command jeep with minimal escort, driving within 3 miles of active combat zones, stopping to talk with soldiers, and walking through towns that had been German-occupied less than 24 hours earlier. And one report described Patton climbing onto a damaged German Panther tank to examine its armor while engineers were still clearing mines from the area. And his aide begged him to leave. And Patton replied, how am I supposed to understand German tank design if I don't? Examine their equipment. And then Eisenhower discovered what Patton had been telling his division commanders, instructions that violated every principle of modern command structure, given verbally, never written down, but confirmed by multiple sources. Lead from the front, be visible to your men. Don't ask them to go anywhere you won't go first. I don't care what SHAF says about appropriate command distances. I care about winning. And we win because our soldiers know their leaders stand with them. And Eisenhower called Bradley again and said, George is teaching his entire command structure to operate like he does. And Bradley replied, I know. We're creating an entire generation of generals who think command means being in tanks. And Eisenhower answered, that's not sustainable, Brad. That's not how modern warfare works. And Bradley said, try telling that to George. Try telling that to Third Army. They're advancing faster than any other army in the theater with fewer losses. His methods work. And Eisenhower replied, they're insane, but they work. And neither man had an answer to that. And by April, the situation escalated again as Third Army raced past Frankfurt, then Kassel, then Fulda. The advance was relentless. German resistance was collapsing. And Patton was telling his staff that he wanted to be in the first tank into Berlin. And he told Major General Hobart Gay, when we take Berlin, I'm going to be there, not behind the lines, not at a headquarters. I'm going to drive through the Brandenburg Gate personally. And his staff was terrified because they knew he was serious. And more importantly, they knew Eisenhower had already made the political decision to let the Soviets take Berlin. But Patton, he doesn't care about political decisions. He cares about glory, about history, about one final charge. And he is 60 years old, running out of time for that charge. And soon reports begin flowing into SAF that Third Army reconnaissance elements are moving faster than authorized, positioning themselves for a major drive east. And it becomes clear that Patton is setting up for something big, something unauthorized, something that could create a diplomatic crisis with the Soviets and on. April 12th, Bradley calls Eisenhower and says, George I can feel it. He's going to try for Berlin regardless of orders and going to try to be in the lead tank when he does it. Can you stop him? Can anyone stop George Patton when he's decided to do something? You've known him longer than I have, you tell me. And Eisenhower is quiet for a moment before answering. That's what I'm afraid of. And at Third Army headquarters, staff officers talk among themselves when Patton isn't listening. And one of them puts it bluntly. The old man is planning his custom moment. Except he thinks he's going to survive it and live forever in the history books. And another replies, knowing General Patton, he probably will. But on April 14th, Patton does something that surprises everyone and forces even his harshest critics to reconsider what truly drives him, because it does not drive toward Berlin. Instead, he drives to Buchenwald, the concentration camp liberated by Third Army units 3 days earlier. And he does not arrive in a command car with full security detail, but in a simple jeep with 2 aides and minimal escort. And he walks through the camp, sees the survivors, sees the evidence of what happened there. And according to multiple accounts from soldiers present, George Patton, who had seen combat on 4 continents, who had led cavalry charges and tank assaults, who everyone assumed was immune to shock, had to stop twice to compose himself. And then he issues orders that every unit, Within 50 miles will go. Every soldier will see what they've been fighting against, no exceptions, officers and enlisted men alike. Because he wants witnesses and he wants his entire army to understand the stakes. But he insists on going first before he sends anyone else, because that is what leaders do in a philosophy. They do not send men where they themselves will not go. And afterward, he tells Major General Hobart Gay in a quiet, strained voice that he has been shot on for continents, that he has led cavalry charges in Mexico and tank assaults in France and Germany. But walking through that camp was the hardest thing he has ever done, and he needed to do it first before asking anyone else to bear witness. And this reaches Eisenhower both through official reports and through the unofficial network of staff officers who talk among themselves. And Eisenhower reads the accounts, studies them, and begins to understand something he had not fully grasped before, that it isn't about glory or headlines or proving toughness. It is about a contract, the unspoken contract between a commander and his soldiers that says, I will ask you to do impossible things, but I will never ask you to do something I would not do myself. And that philosophy is reckless by conventional standards, dangerous, tactically questionable, and in violation of every modern principle of command. But it is also why Third Army follows Patton anywhere, why they advance faster, fight harder, and believe themselves invincible, because their commanding general has proven again and again that he stands with them. And then comes April 18th, 1945, at Eisenhower's headquarters. When the war is clearly ending, German resistance is collapsing across the entire front, Berlin is encircled by Soviet forces, and the end is only weeks away. And Patton returns from his tour of the liberated camps and walks into Eisenhower's office, with no mud this time and no grin, looking exhausted, older, haunted by what he has seen. And Eisenhower gestures to a chair and says, "Sit down, George." And for once, Patton does not argue. And Eisenhower says he has heard about Buchenwald and that Patton went personally. And Patton replies that he had to see it before he sent his men to see it. And Eisenhower tells him he didn't have to go first, that he could have sent staff officers to assess the situation and then visited with proper security. And Patton shakes his head and says no, that is not how he commands, that he does not send men where he will not go, that he never has and never will, even when it is easy to stay back, especially when it is easy to stay back. And Eisenhower studies him for a long moment and then says that is why he was in that tank, that it was never about proving toughness or seeking glory, but about showing his men that he would share their risks, always and every time. And Patton agrees and says that is the contract between commander and his men, that he will ask them to do impossible things and demand everything from them, but he will never ask them to do something he would not do himself. That is the only way leadership works for him, even at 60 years old, even when he is too valuable to risk, especially then, because that is when it matters most, because when you have a rank and authority to stay safe, that is when you have to prove you won't, that is when your soldiers need to see you are still with them. And Eisenhower leans back and grows quiet for a long time, thinking and processing, and finally he speaks. And according to Walter Bedell Smith's memoirs, published decades later, this is what Eisenhower said in that moment. "George, you are the most infuriating officer I have ever commanded. You break rules. You ignore orders. You put yourself in danger unnecessarily, and you make my life a living hell with your stunts, your insubordination, and your complete disregard for conventional command wisdom." And Patton started to respond, but Eisenhower raised a hand and stopped him. "And you are absolutely right about all of it. Your men would follow you into hell because they truly know, that you would lead the way. You would be the first one through the gates. And I cannot order you to stop being who you are, because if you stop being you, you would stop being the commander your army needs. So I am not going to order you to stay safe. I am asking you as a friend, as someone who has known you for 30 years, try not to get killed before this is over, because I need you for what comes after. I need you to help us win the peace, and I need you alive to do it." And Patton sat there processing those words, because this was not a reprimand. This was acceptance. This was Eisenhower finally understanding that you cannot change George Patton. You can only point in the right direction and hope he survives. And Patton finally said quietly, "I'll try, Ike. That's all I can promise. I'll try." And Eisenhower replied, That's all I'm asking. And this moment was not about disobedience. It was about two fundamentally different philosophies, two different ways of reaching the same goal. Because Eisenhower commanded from headquarters, where a supreme commander belongs, where you can see the entire theater, coordinate multiple armies, manage political relationships with allies, and balance strategic objectives with limited resources, while Patton commanded from the front, because that is how you inspire soldiers, how you create the fighting spirit that makes men charge into fire, how you build the personal loyalty that turns a collection of divisions into a unified striking force. And both were right. Both were necessary, and in that moment in April 1945, Eisenhower finally stopped fighting Patton's nature and accepted it, because the results of Third Army spoke for themselves, advancing farther and faster with fewer casualties per mile gained than any other Allied army in Europe, liberating or capturing over 80,000 square miles of territory, freeing hundreds of thousands of prisoners, and never losing a defensive position in 2 years of continuous combat. And the mud on Patton's uniform in Eisenhower's office in March had not been disrespect. It had been proof that George Patton meant what he said when he told his soldiers he would go where he sent them. And Patton survived the war, continued leading from the front until Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, attended the surrender ceremonies, gave speeches, prepared for occupation, duties, and then 7 months later, on December 9, 1945, he was critically injured in a car accident near Mannheim, Germany, during a routine drive to go hunting. Not in combat, not in a tank, not in anything heroic, just a simple accident. And he died 12 days later on December 21st, 1945, at the age of 60 in a hospital bed, not leading a charge and not in a tank, in a way no one who knew him ever expected. And his funeral was attended by hundreds of his soldiers, men who had served under him from North Africa to Germany, tank commanders, infantry privates, artillery officers, all coming to pay respect to the general who had led them, who had stood with them, who had proven again and again that rank did not exempt him from danger, and according to multiple accounts, many of them said variations of the same thing. He would have led us anywhere, to Berlin, to Tokyo, to hell itself, because we knew, absolutely knew, he would be in front and he would go first. That is why we followed him. And the mud on his boots in Eisenhower's office in March 1945 was never about breaking regulations. It was about keeping faith, the faith between commander and soldiers, the promise that leadership means sharing the risks, not avoiding them. And that philosophy made Patton impossible to manage, made him a liability according to doctrine, made him a constant source of worry for Eisenhower, Bradley, and everyone else in the chain of command, but it also made him Patton the general, whose soldiers believed he was invincible, who inspired men to achieve the impossible because they knew he would be there achieving it beside them, who could never stay in headquarters because that was not where leadership happened. Leadership happened wherever soldiers needed to see their commander standing with them. And in his 1948 memoir, Crusade in Europe, Eisenhower reflected on Patton, writing that Patton was the most brilliant armored field commander of World War II and also the most difficult subordinate he ever had, that he could not stay in headquarters or command from safety, that he needed to be where the fighting was regardless of rank, age, or staff objections, that Eisenhower spent half the war afraid Patton would be killed doing something courageous and unnecessary, but that his soldiers would have followed him anywhere because they knew he would lead them there, and that was worth more than all the tactical doctrines ever written. And that is the verdict of history. What remains when the arguments, regulations, and concerns about protocol fade away? Because George Patton, at 60 years old, covered in mud, standing in Eisenhower's office in March 1945, represented something that cannot be taught in military academies, cannot be regulated by headquarters, and cannot be controlled or forced into conventional wisdom. He represented leadership as personal commitment, as shared sacrifice, as the unbreakable promise that wherever soldiers go, their command will go first, right or wrong, reckless or brilliant, approved or forbidden. That was Patton, and Eisenhower finally stopped trying to change him, because you cannot change a tiger's stripes. You can only point him toward the enemy and hope he survives long enough. And the mud eventually dried. The boots were cleaned, The uniform was pressed, but the message remained, written in the memories of every soldier who served under George Patton, written in the history of Third Army's advance across Europe, written in the contract between leaders and those they lead. I will ask you to do impossible things, but I will never ask you to do something I would not do myself. Even under fire, even when everyone says it is reckless. That was a promise. That was a contract. That was Patton. And that is why, 80 years later, his story still matters. And if this story revealed something about leadership and courage you had never seen before, do this for me right now. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling me which untold story from the war you want to hear next. Because we are building a community that refuses to let these moments disappear into footnotes. These are the leaders who change history. These are the decisions that show what real courage looks like, and their stories deserve to be told. And I will see you in the next one.